everyone. Welcome to the Kimberly Cloud Show. I'm your host, Kimberly Cloud. Round two of a special guest. Can you go ahead and announce to the world your name and where you're calling from?
Dr. Scott Kolbaba. I'm calling from just one of the suburbs of Chicago where it's raining, cold, and miserable.
Sorry to hear that. We're going to do this right this time. Can you go ahead and talk about your past leading up into your present, Scott, Dr. Scott?
Sure, be glad to. I'm a general internist, so I see adult patients in the office and adolescents in the office. I work at Northwestern Medicine Adolescent Psych Unit part-time, and I see lots of psych patients there, which is what got me interested in this topic of teenage depression. I've been a doctor for more years than I'd like to admit. I think it's over 40 now, I think. And I know I look much younger than that. So, and I love what I do. I see all kinds of things, both minor things like backaches and diarrhea and sore throats and COVID and so forth. And then I see some serious things. And the one thing that I saw that really got my attention and made me think about this topic was a little girl by the name of Emily. That's not her real name, but I saw Emily in the emergency room. And at that time, emergency rooms all the time are busy. It was hustle and bustle. And as I approached her room, I could hear someone sobbing inside the room. And I knew I was in trouble then. And so as I walked in, there was Emily on a gurney, beautiful 13-year-old girl, deeply comatose, looked like she was dead. Her mother was holding her hand and sobbing uncontrollably. Father was sitting in the chair right next to the gurney. And it looked like she had taken a large dose of pills that her mother was taking, which is why she was in a coma. And so this is a life and death situation. I rushed her up to the intensive care unit. We intubated her. We put a tube into her stomach to pump her stomach. And fortunately, Emily, survived. Kids do pretty well generally with most illnesses. And I take care of some of the old folks too, which don't do as well. But Emily survived. The problem is that I didn't. I was changed forever. And I realized that I needed to do something about this epidemic, which is now an epidemic of teen depression. And so that's when I got started and interested in the topic. And the first thing I decided to do was to write a book. And the book is called Clara's Magic Garden. I've got a copy right here. And it's an Amazon bestseller. It's about a little girl that was lonely and a little depressed, and she had a magic garden in her backyard, and she worked in the garden and planted a little bush that was kind of ugly, and everyone in the garden thought that the bush was not very nice and not very pretty also. And so she was able to kind of commiserate with the bush. At the end of the season, the bush turned into a burning bush. It was absolutely gorgeous and the most beautiful thing in the garden. And she realized then that she was beautiful too, that she was a special person. And so that's kind of how the book evolves. And I realized then too that I needed to do more than that. So I started to do these podcasts and try to get the word out. And what I found in my research was that one of the big things that helps with depression, especially teen depression, is purpose. If a person has a purpose, they are less depressed. When they wake up in the morning with something that they look forward to doing, that makes a huge difference. And it can be anything. It can be football. It can be art. It can be writing. And many of the kids that I see in the psych unit have no purpose. And I asked the nurses there and the social workers, I said, how many of these kids, we had about a dozen kids in the psych unit. And I said, how many of these kids have a purpose? And they said, no one. None of them have a purpose. And the psych doctors define purpose as a passion for something that you love. And you devote that to becoming your purpose. And then you use that purpose to help somebody in the world, either kids or anyone, a cause. And so that seems to be the ticket. And when I did some research on this, it looks like the research supports this. There's a couple really big studies. There's one from the Journal of Clinical Psychology. They analyzed 66,000 people. And they found that when people had a purpose, They were healthier, they're stronger, they were more resilient, and they were less depressed. And so I'm thinking, what can we do when there's a shortage of healthcare workers today and a shortage of psychiatrists? I have trouble getting, when I have a person that's really sick mentally and I've got to get them into a psychiatrist, it takes 3 months to access a psychiatrist. And the psychologists are busy too. So there's a huge shortage of mental health workers. So I'm thinking, what can we do that doesn't require a mental health worker that you can do, that everyone that's listening to this can do? And they can find a teen that is not quite as happy as they'd like to be, a little depressed, and they can encourage them to find their passion. And when I talk to the kids in the psych unit, all of them have a passion for something. The last one I saw yesterday, I said, what do you like to do? And she said, I like to write. And I said, well, who knows about your writing? And she says, no one. I said, have you told your parents? Well, no. And I said, you need to tell your parents and then have them help you pursue that passion. And if they do that, that can make a huge difference. And sometimes it doesn't take a lot of effort to do that. I go to Phoenix to visit. I've got 7 kids. I'm not sure where they all came from, but I've got 7 kids. And I've got a dozen grandkids. And we like to go to Phoenix. We have 4 kids that live in Phoenix with their families. So we go to Phoenix quite a bit. And a couple of years ago, I was in Phoenix and we decided to go fishing with my 2 grandsons, the 2 boys. So we went out and, Phoenix doesn't have a lot of lakes and a lot of fish, as you can imagine. But we went to a park in the middle of Phoenix where there's a pond, and we got out the fishing rods and the lures and so forth. And no one was hooked. We hooked a few trees, but no one was hooked in the ear or anywhere else. And we fished for about 2 hours and caught absolutely nothing. We didn't even see a fish. So I was a little disappointed, and I thought, what a waste of time. I really took these kids out and we didn't accomplish very much at all. About 2 or 3 years later, one of the kids, I think it was Wyatt, came up to me and said, Grampy, that fishing trip we went on a couple of years ago? And I said, yes. And he said, that was the best day of my life. What an incredible thing. So it doesn't require a lot to get kids interested in something, and they've been fishing ever since. I did another interview.
Quick question. How do you think an environment such as when they go home, if their parents are being abusive, how do you think they should get out of that? Because sometimes it's the parents that's lacking what they're doing that's making their child grow up to lack and end up rotating in and out of jail or in mental hospitals or psychiatric or however. What is your input on that, doctor?
That's a tough one. My son-in-law, who married my daughter, Jordan, was involved with that kind of a family. He had two parents, unfortunately, that were drug addicts. They were in and out of jail. And what happened to him is he was raised by his grandparents. And that was a huge benefit to him because he turned out to be a really solid kid. And he's got a regular job and he's doing really well. So sometimes that is a potential. Or someone else, uncle or someone else that might be able to raise the kid. The other thing is, you can talk to the counselor at school and involve them and get some people to check out the home and things like that. The other problem that we see is that parents are really busy these days. Everyone has to work. Yeah. And with inflation being at 20 or 30%, everyone's struggling. Half my kids are not, very wealthy, and they have regular jobs, and most of them are both employed, and they're struggling to make ends meet. So when that's the case, you're working hard. It's hard when you get home because you don't have the time to spend with the kids. But again, it doesn't take very much. And some of the things that we've done with our kids, when a kid comes home and you say, well, how was school today? You know what they're going to say, Kim? They're going to say, oh, fine. What'd you do? Nothing. That's the standard. And we've gone through that with 7 kids. So what do? We take the kids for a walk, one at a time. And we have a house that lives that's on a circular road. And we walk around. The circle's a half mile. We walk around the circle a couple times. And it's amazing the stuff that comes out. And you don't even have to start the conversation. The kids usually, tell you, well, there's a tough day. I was, one of the kids was bullying me and whatever. So
Can I
that's
ask
the way
you
to
another
get kids to
question?
come out.
Did you hear? I'm sorry to cut you off, but did you hear about some schools for the children that's already implanted in the mental health facility that you treat? Did you hear about students at high schools and middle schools, the principal or the superintendent actually hiding the number of fights that they actually be in because they don't want to look like a bad school? Did you hear
I've heard
about?
that. I've
Yeah,
heard that. I'm not surprised. I'm
yeah,
not surprised at all. And what's the solution to that? The solution is to have alternative schools. Our
yes.
kids in Arizona have charter schools that they can go to, and the government supports most of them. And so that would be a potential alternative. It's hard. The only way to get out of, and there are lots of people, lots of minorities, especially that are stuck in bad schools and they can't get out of the whole trap that they're in. And I think they need to be given an opportunity to get out of that school to a charter school where they don't have fights every day and they don't have lots of drugs. Everyone's going to have drugs, but the drugs are not a big issue as they are in some schools. And I think that is the potential solution. And there are lots of people that are against that. But that's what we need, some way to get these kids out of the poverty cycle. They need an education, and the education is one of the main things to get kids out of the poverty cycle.
Did you hear? Well said. Did you hear about the teachers? And then it starts with the teachers too, because they're underpaying them. They're buying property and creating small, complex apartments for them. But we need more pay for them because they're the gatekeepers that help our children learn and get a healthy education. What is your input on that, doctor?
Teachers are critical. I think when you think about the teachers that I've had, they have changed my life. And so teachers are absolutely critical. You need the best teachers you can get, and you need to pay them as much as you can to teach these vulnerable kids and to influence their lives for the good.
Yeah, and tell me, speaking of schools, tell me about, because you had a really cool story you told me the last time we were talking. Tell me about what happened and how you got into med school with the last class that you could take or something like that. I remember it, but I can't say it. Go ahead. You have the
Yeah,
floor.
that was the one with the books.
Yes. And you
Yeah,
couldn't go get into the school. You had
yeah,
to ask
yeah.
the teacher and everything.
That was a crazy story.
Wow.
I was always interested in getting into medicine since I was in kindergarten, and then in high school in college I should say I got into some classes that were just really very very boring, and everyone was saying, "Oh, these are the classes that you'll take in medical school," and I almost threw up because some of these classes were embryology and things like that I actually have never used, would never use. And so I majored in economics. When I got out of college, I got a job, and I thought, oh, after the first couple of weeks, I thought I need to go back in medicine. That's really where I want to be. And so I had to take classes and courses and so forth. And by this time, I had a family and I had people to support, so I needed a good job. So I fooled around for a year trying to get into medical school, and I couldn't do it. My grades weren't fantastic. They were B pluses, but not like the straight A's that most medical students had. And my scores on the MCATs were in the 24th percentile. And so I studied my backside off for about a year, and I improved my MCAT score to 94 percentile. And I took some classes, but I had to take organic chemistry. That was the one class I had to take. And if I couldn't get into the organic chemistry this particular year, I'd have to give up my goal to be a doctor and go into some job that I could support my family with. So fortunately, organic chemistry was offered at night school in two schools, Roosevelt University downtown Chicago and Aurora University. I was working in Aurora, so that was great. So I got to the bookstore. I bought a book. There was tons of books on the shelves, falling off the shelves, literally. And I went to the first class, and the professor walked in, and there were three students in the class, and he said, didn't even sit down. He said, "I'm sorry, we're canceling this class." My heart sunk. I thought, oh no, I'm never going to get to medical school because I'm not going to be able to take organic chemistry, and I'll be a failure in life and so forth, how that goes through your mind. But I thought, the next day I'll go down to Roosevelt University and see if I can get into their class, because that was only their class offered at nighttime. So I went down there, waited in line for the registrar, and I got to the front of the line, and the registrar said, I'm sorry, the organic chemistry class is filled. We opened up another class, that's filled. We have 8 on the waiting list, and I'm sorry, you won't get into organic chemistry this year. So my heart sunk. I said I was desperate. I was very desperate because my life was on the line. At least I thought it was. So I said to her, well, who makes the ultimate decision about getting into organic chemistry? And she said, well, the professors, and they're meeting upstairs right now in room 303 or whatever it was. So I ran up to the room 303. There was the waiting room was filled with students. I'm sure wanting to do the same thing I did. And so I must have had a tear in my eye or something, but the secretary felt sorry for me. And so she said, if you want to take 3 minutes, no more, go to the ante room where the 2 professors are talking about the class. So I waited in the ante room, and the door was paper thin. I could hear exactly what they were saying. And they were saying, it's terrible. We have opened this new class, the second class, and there are no books. We've called the publisher. There are no organic chemistry books. In those days, you didn't have computer books. You had just paper books.
Yeah.
And they were saying, we checked with all the schools in the area. No one has any organic chemistry books. We're really stuck, and we start the class in 2 days. I don't know what we're going to do. So they talked for a little while longer. Then the one professor left, and I walked in, and the professor was very uninterested because I'm sure he had been talking to dozens of students that wanted to get into organic chemistry but couldn't. And I told him my story of woe, and he said, I'm very sorry. We have 2 classes. They're both filled. We have 8 on the waiting list, and so forth. The same word that I heard before. And so he didn't even look at me, didn't even make eye contact, shook my hand and saw me out. And I thought, I've got to do something. My life is on the line here. So I said to him, I understand you need some books for your organic chemistry class. And he said, well, yes. And all of a sudden he's making eye contact with me and his eyebrows go up. And I said, and my heart is in my throat, because this is a bold step that I don't normally do. And so I said to him, if I can get you books, will you let me in? And the silence, it seemed like hours before he said anything. And he finally said, can you get me 30? And I said to him, more. And he said, you're in. So they got the books from Aurora University bookstore. I got into the class, and that's the story of how I got into medical school. Now, the interesting thing is, what is the likelihood that I would have been there at the exact moment they were talking? That was just like 15 seconds of talking that they did. Why would I be there right at the very time they were talking about that, when only I could help them and only they could help me? That is something that's, I think, from above.
I agree, man. Oh my God. That's such a powerful story. And you took it and ran with it and became a doctor. Tell me about an instance where you saw something that was unexplainable in your medical field from the books that you've read at school, college, and through the years. Did you ever witness something?
Oh, yeah, I wrote a book called Physicians' Untold Stories, which is about miraculous experiences in physicians' lives. And I've got a good one. One of my gynecology friends, actually, he delivered my 3rd son. And my 3rd son is still talking and walking and has a job. So he did a good job. And it's about his wife. They have 8 kids. And his wife Joan, was delivering their 5th child. And, after the delivery went pretty well. And after the delivery, she was having a lot of pain. They had to do some procedures to remove some of the placenta that was left in the uterus at the time. So they decided to give her some anesthetic to numb, to put her out, put her to sleep. Well, it's interesting. Her grandmother was Grandma O'Hanlon, who was an old midwife, and she knew a lot about deliveries and so forth. And Grandma O'Hanlon, interestingly, stepped into the room at that time. And she was dressed in her usual polka dot dress and her old lady shoes and her her hair in a bun, and she stood at the end of the bed and she shook her head. No, Joan, don't do that. Don't take the anesthesia. No one
You there,
realized.
sir? Doctor?
Yes,
Dr. Kabbalah?
yes.
Oh,
Hello.
man. They don't want the story to get out. Are you
Okay.
there? Let's
Yeah.
repeat the story. Repeat the story. You froze there for a second.
Okay. Grandma Hanlon walked into the room dressed in her usual garb, which is a dress with polka dots and hair up in a bun, old lady shoes, and
Good.
she stood there, and she at the end of the bed, and she shook her head. Joan, don't do this. And so, like I said, Grandma Hanlon was a midwife, so she knew a lot about deliveries and so forth. And no one realized that Joan had eaten a large meal right before she went into labor. And when they were about ready to put the mask over her, and then she pushed it aside, about 15 seconds later, she vomited the whole meal that she had. And so, had she had the mask on and had been unconscious, she would have aspirated and would have been very, very sick and maybe could have died from that. So, Grandma Hanlon literally saved her life. Now, the interesting thing is, Grandma Hanlon crossed time and eternity because she had died 22 years before that.
Okay. She okay. I'm confused now. She
She
died
was she
20,
was
20,
she died 22 years before she came into the room with Joan, but she was still looking after Joan from the other side, and appeared to her as a vision. No one
unbelievable.
else saw her in the room.
See, these are stories that people don't understand, because they don't see. Okay, for instance, everybody sees people, but once you step out that room and you become different and you start seeing ghosts and spiritual beings, they pump you full of medicine and say you're crazy because they don't see it either, and
Right.
and, and it's not right. I believe it. Can you tell me another story too?
Sure. Let's see. There's some good stories. Let's see. Probably one of them is about a doctor that was an orthopedic surgeon, a back surgeon, also a trauma surgeon. And he was skiing with his wife and his wife's sister in Colorado. He had been real busy, been a stressful time for them, and he wanted to take it easy for a little bit. So they decided to go on a new mountain. He was an expert skier, so were his wife and his wife's sister. So they decided to go on this new mountain, and as they got to the top of the mountain, a blizzard hit. And so the wind was blowing really fast. The temperature dropped about 40 degrees, and they couldn't see very much at all. But they were on the top of this mountain. They had to get down, and they could only see about 10 feet in front of them. They got out the map to see where they were, and they decided that we've got to start skiing. So were skiing down, and as they were going down, they came to a grove of trees, and the trees there was a path to the left and to the right. Well, Steve's a surgeon, so not to make fun of surgeons at all, of course. Steve expected everyone to follow him. And so the girls happened to go to the left, and then Steve went to the right. And so when he realized that, he decided to ski through the grove of trees because he's an expert skier. It was about 5 feet of powder on the slope. And so he's skiing through this grove of trees, and all of a sudden he had this awful sense of doom in his chest. Have you ever felt a sense of really something serious is happening here that he needs to
Yeah.
take care of?
Yep. Yep.
So he didn't know what to do, so he stopped skiing. So here he is. The girls are waiting for him on the other side. He's not seeing them, and he stops skiing. He takes his skis off and starts to walk up the mountain. He had no idea why he was walking up the mountain in the opposite direction from where the girls were waiting for him. But he had this premonition he had to do this. So he's walking and climbing and walking and climbing. And after he gets a few minutes up the mountain, he comes to a tree that has a tree well. The tree well is where the snow comes down to the base of the tree, around the tree. So it's like a little dish almost. And so he looks down and suddenly realizes why he's there. There at the bottom of the tree was a body covered with snow. Had he not been there, that body would have been covered and never found until springtime. It was a skier that had hit the tree. As a trauma surgeon, he reached down to see if he had a pulse. And that's the first thing you do as a surgeon, a trauma surgeon. And he had a carotid artery pulse. So he knew he was alive. It was very, very weak. So he started yelling for help. And he was yelling, help, help. One of the last skiers down the mountain heard his cry, came to stop and see what was going on. And he said, this guy's almost dead. You need to go get the ski patrol and the lodge as quickly as possible. So about 10 minutes later, the guy had gone down to the lodge, called the ski patrol. They came up with a gurney, took the guy off to the lodge where the ambulance was waiting, whisked them off to the hospital. By this time, Steve was shaking with adrenaline and also cold because he used some of his jackets to put on the skier. Then went over to where the girls were waiting, skied over to where the girls were waiting, and they skied down the lodge. At the base of the mountain where the lodge was, they gave him his reward, a cup of hot chocolate. And the next day he called the hospital. They said, "How is this guy doing?" And they said, "The guy is alive. He's well. You splinted his broken leg with a tree branch, and that was perfect. You're a great orthopedic surgeon. We didn't even have to do anything." And so that was. And Steve said to me, "If you don't believe in something above, when you see something like that happens, I don't know what you believe in." So that was his story of some miraculous experience.
Well said, doctor. That is a powerful story. Is that in your book?
That's in my first book, Physicians Untold Stories. So
Yeah, y'all need to go out and buy. I'm going to go out and buy that because I love hearing stories of the supernatural and untold stories. Yes,
here it is. It's also an Amazon bestseller, Physicians Untold Stories.
believe you. Yes. And the one you have is about the young 13-year-old child that had the tree and it just enraged in flames and everything. That's a beautiful story too, man. You're very talented. You're multi-talented. If you had to give a piece of advice to med students that hasn't quite gotten to med, took biology as their bachelor's degree, and they're wondering, well, should I get into med school? What story would you give them to show them that, hey, look, I did it, you can do it?
I interviewed with the most powerful man in Chicago medicine, who was the dean of a medical college. I won't mention the medical college, when I was interviewing to go into medical school. And I was really pleased, but my credentials weren't very good. My grades were B plus. My MCAT scores at that point were 24 percentile. And so I was thinking, it's really quite an honor to interview with this head of the school, basically. And I was so excited that why he would pick me. Maybe it was my recommendations or whatever. So we interviewed, and I was really, really excited because I knew that this was the guy to talk to. And he stood up at the end of the interview and then looked me straight in the eye and said, "Mr. Kolbaba, you just don't have what it takes to become a doctor. You should pursue another career." I was devastated, as you can imagine. And I was depressed. And after about 2 weeks, I finally came out of it. And after that, I said to myself, I'm going to prove him wrong. I'm going to do this. And I was a student on fire. I got A's at all my prerequisite classes after that. I studied like crazy. I had no time to do anything, with no parties. I was just a studying fool. And then I got all A's on my prerequisites, improved my MCAT scores, and did get in. And the interesting part, there's justice in this world, Kim, and the justice is, after medical school is 4 years, you have an internship and residency. My internship was at the same university where this dean was still there. And so after the first year of internship, I was awarded the intern of the year. And guess who had to present the intern of the year?
The doctor, I mean, the dean. The
The
dean.
dean. You guessed it. So I don't know if he remembered, but I did. And there's justice in this world. So if
Well,
people want to do something bad enough, just keep at it and you can do it. If I can do it, you can do it.
how can the people reach you, Dr. Kabbalah? Well,
Uh, clarasmagicgardenbook.com. clarasmagicgardenbook.com is our website. They can reach me there, and I'm happy to reach out to anyone. So
wow. You know what? This is a brilliant doctor that has struggles in the heart of Chicago, going to the outskirts, trying to find colleges to go to so he can take that one organic chemistry class. That's a powerful story. Have you ever written a story about yourself?
well, it's in my book. That
Oh,
the book,
yeah.
yeah. the book is, and I never realized it was more than just luck that got me that time slot that was right when they were talking about the books. So I didn't realize that until I was actually writing the book. And then I thought, oh, this is a miraculous story. I need to put this in the book too. That's a fun story to tell. So
Stay on the line, doctor. Thank you all for joining my show. Y'all take care. Have a wonderful day, man. And I'll be back on here later. Thank you.